Hi, and welcome to another Pro Tools quick tip and other useful things. Today we're going to be discussing VePro with Pro Tools, but from a user request of incorporating the free Epic Orchestra that comes with VePro. This is how we're going to set it up. First of all, what I always do is bring up a VePro server, which is in 64-bit. I've already made the meta frame, labeled it VePro Epic Orchestra. And here I am. You can see I'm already connected as well into Pro Tools. I have my plugin instantiated. It's connected to my server. I have 8 channels in MIDI. If you want to know how to go ahead and assign these in a quick manner, you can take a look at another video of mine that I've done regarding VePro and setting it up. Now moving on to Epic Orchestra. Now let's go back into VePro. So here's our blank slate. The first thing that we want to do is open up the VE. The first thing that we want to do is open up the Vienna Instruments. And I actually have the Pro version, but this should work with just the free Vienna Instruments as well that comes with it. It launches, and this is what we get. Now, you can see that it's in basic view, and if you switch over to advanced, you can see that there's other parameters that you can look at. Now, you may see a little bit different aspects of what this offers because I have the Pro version, but this will work in the same way. So let's just go back to basics so we can just kind of get a general overview. So let's go ahead and take a look at these 3 tabs. We have presets. Here I have the Epic Orchestra that is loaded, the Matrix tab, and the Patch tab. Now, the Patch tab is where just the individual patches live. If I go to Strings, I see here that these are the individual instruments. So if I just want to load staccatos, I take this and I load it into A. Let's make sure I have my Pro Tools record armed. I do. And so if I play this, we get staccato. Now, if I want to replace it and play sustain, then I have to drag it over here and replace this sustain. And the same goes with every patch here. So the cool thing is that you can use it in this fashion and just load instrument per instrument and just patch per patch per patch. But they've actually done a very creative design with the Vienna Instruments, and that's what we're going to take a look at. Let's go back over here to the Matrix tab. Now the Matrix is what is over here on the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and double click on the Appassionata Strings Matrix. It will load over what we have. And you can see here it's actually created what we call cells. And on the X vertice, or X axis actually, you can see here that we have let's look at the advanced. We have the staccato, and then we have the sustain fast, sforzando, tremolo, and the pizzicato. Now all of these are correlated to key switching. So pizzicato is C8, and when I click on this, it's B7, so on and so forth. This is, people still use key switching. I typically don't, but if I get really heavy into it, then sometimes I will. It just depends. But one thing I always do is instead of using a velocity trigger, so if I go to staccato over here, let's go to sustain, and I'm going to play very softly. Now I'm going to play relatively hard, harder. So it's all velocity based. Now, what I typically like to do is have a more musical nature to it using the mod wheel. And in order to do that, what you want to do is use the velocity dot crossfade. Now, it's written velocity crossfade, but basically it's not a velocity crossfade. It's either velocity or crossfade because you can't have a crossfade in velocity. So without it checked, it's using velocity, but having it checked is using crossfade. So where's the crossfade? Well, here's the crossfade over here. So if I play sustain with it all the way up, it's really loud. If I bring it down to its softest level, more or less, it's very soft. Now, we want to do this in real time on our mod wheel, so we need to assign it to our mod wheel. In order to do that, you have to right click, or on your laptop, which I am right now, I'm not on my other computer, use two fingers and push down or right click, and it'll glow. That's saying, okay, I'm ready to receive any kind of MIDI information to control this parameter. So I'm going to move my mod wheel, and now I can glide nicely back and forth like this. So that's a little bit more expressive way of doing things. That's the way I like to do it. It's a little bit more musical. Now, in order to change patches, they correspond with G7 up top and so on and so forth. Now, that should be pretty obvious. But one other thing that I want to show you here is that you have options to change patches in other ways. This might be the easier way, but we can go over here and hit key switch, and you have the ability to actually use the pitch wheel. You can use speed, which is very cool in some applications. I'll show that in a second. Velocity, which some other sample libraries do, like I believe Cinesample, Cinebrass, things like that. I think depending on how hard you hit, sometimes it, maybe in the past, maybe they changed it, I think, um, to using a sustain pedal to switch. But the harder you hit, it hits a different sample, like a shorter staccato and or into spiccato or marcato. And if you hit lightly, then it's actually sustained. But I don't typically like to do that way. I like to have a little bit more expressivity over that. But it's all in different ways. It's all subjective. However works for you is the best way for you. Just keep that in mind. So you need to experiment with the different parameters and how they correspond with your composition making and your musicality. So let's go ahead and take a look at the controllers. You can see here that you can actually assign it to um, the mod wheel, which I would never do, but basically any of these parameters you can draw into your automation and it will change in that patch. And that's a little bit harder. So that's why people typically do key switching down here, or up here in this case, since it's on G7 and up. Let's go ahead and take a look at the preset tab, and let's double click on the Apasionado Strings preset. Now, preset is basically things that have been saved for you to come back to. I had already kind of saved some things here, working with another client with some solo strings and whatnot, um, things of that nature, brass things I have saved. But in the matrix section is where they're trying to show you that you can use the left-hand side over here. You can actually say add a cell and then click on that next cell. Well, it's actually not a cell, but let's just say system. This next little system, and you can actually add in different types of articulations um, that might even expand more past what you want in the strings. So let's say we only want the sustains on this first um, system. So let's go ahead and resize this to 2. I'll go over here to the patches, take the sustain, put it in that place, and then I'll take the sustain fast and put it here, and now I'll resize it. Now you can see that we have sustain, sustain fast. Now this is a great way of actually using the speed function. So whenever you play a passage that goes from one note to the next within a certain period of time, if I take this note, C, I go up to D, when I go back and forth, it resides in this little section, but if I go faster, it actually triggers the fast portion. So, and that's always kind of nice. It adds a little bit more realism. Um, so you can add this patch as not a key switch, but within a parameter, and then come over here to the matrix and then make these into key switches themselves. So this can actually be on C sharp or F or whatever. Let's see, let's go to C0, and maybe this one will be on C sharp 0. And that way you have key switches that are kind of subgrouped in a way to using um, other patches that correspond more closely to each other. Let's say we wanted to do the shorter notes on this key switch. Let's add a staccato on the first one, and then we'll add a pizzicato on the second. Now, what we could do is add another key switch inside a key switch, but maybe we want to actually use um, a velocity. Maybe the harder we hit, is where we want to have the pizzicatos come in, and then if we bring down and if we assign our velocity crossfade again, so we play a velocity that's relatively the same, but then we can take the velocity crossfade up, or excuse me, the crossfade up, and then now it's really loud. So if we want to hit a really strong velocity and trigger the pizzicato, I'm hitting pretty hard, but you can see it's a soft pizzicato, and when I crank up the mod wheel, it takes that expression up in that range. So if you know that within your project, let's go over here to Pro Tools. Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into this really quick. What we can do is see that, let's say I want this first section just to be all pizzicatos. So I'll drag the velocities up to where the pizzicatos reside, and then maybe on this last portion, I'll take these velocities down to the staccato. And we'll still follow the crossfade, so that's where you can get all your dynamics. Let's play it back. Now here's another thing. Let's say that we wanted to add a sustain line. Let's go ahead and throw down a key switch. Okay, let's go ahead and record one more time. So if we go back, we can see that if we play before this key switch, triggers everything that we need to. Staccato is high velocity, low velocity. So when we go back here and play, we can see that the pizzicatos on the high velocity trigger and using the same dynamics with the mod wheel. Low velocity. Key switch, sustains. just like that. And it sounds a little dry, doesn't it? So just temporarily, let's go ahead and put a little reverb on this. So in the basic section, you can see that's actually grayed out. It's not activated. So what we want to do is we can go to this cogwheel, or we can go to advanced. But if we click on the cogwheel, it takes us to the reverb section in the advanced area. And let's go ahead and put it on the algorithm. And let's go back to basic and play our. So not too bad. Some other functions that we can go ahead and try out that I like to do on my brass and woodwind sections is using the humanize. And what you want to do here is, and this is what I typically do, is go to finding tune. That's my favorite, and then a random 8. And it will actually go through different attacks and pitch waver a little bit. And you can adjust this, and it kind of gives like a little realism because every instrument kind of has to it doesn't hit the pitch square on every time. I'm a saxophone player myself, and sometimes you're going to have to either kind of bring up the pitch because you hear it initially, or it's going to waver just a tiny bit. With brass, especially, if they hit a note, it needs some time. It needs a humanized function. This is what it's for. So this is applied on the sustain, and that's the other thing. You have to go to each patch and do this. It's not a global for each matrice. So let's go over here and do the same thing. And we'll go down here. Let's go ahead and load. Of course, this is the pro version, and I haven't seen the non-pro version. If this isn't in here, I'm sorry. It actually might not be, but maybe this is just another incentive to get it. So, um, yeah, FYI. Okay, let's check this out now. Now you can't hear anything because we haven't turned on the humanize. And that's what you want to do. You can see the tuning here. Let's say we turn it up like that. And the delay is actually kind of a fun thing too. If it gets a little too machine gun-like and robotic, it kind of retimes it a tiny bit. Let's try it again. So it's subtle, but every little piece of realism just adds up, and that's how you get great mock-ups and whatnot. And this is actually a little great um, plugin that they've designed for their instruments. So that's one way you can do it. You can also see that there's something called a slot crossfade, and sometimes this is really fun because let's say I want to play sustain, but I don't want to trigger a tremolo. I want the sustain to actually go into a tremolo. So if I go to sustain, you can see here that I have two parts, an A and a B on this first line. This is one of the first cell. This is two of the first cell, A and B. So let's go to tremolo, and I will actually drag this onto B. And this is where the kind of magic happens, is that this little dot here says, if you click it, it can now crossfade in between, or slot crossfade. So this is a slot crossfade, and if I play the sustain portion, I'll show you just by adjusting it. Pretty cool, huh? Adds some real depth and dimension to it and musicality. It's always nice to have these things where You're not always having to switch patches, and it's apparent that you're hitting um, another patch. It's actually kind of blending and it sounds more musical. And that's the overall goal we're trying to get, is to be musical. So um, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other parameters that we have here. Here's the control map. This is where all the controller data is, and it says that volume is CC7, expression is CC11, 125, so on and so forth. And you probably already saw all this, but slot crossfade here, you can see that you can do all kinds of different um, mappings and graphs and inversions and velocity crossfade, same kind of thing. So the great thing here that if you're trying to figure out um, what parameter you're looking for, this is where you come, and then you go to slot crossfade, and then you learn the parameters. So I would learn, let's say I want this to be mod wheel. You can now see the mod wheel because I just now moved it. You can, but let's say I want this to be 2 instead. So let's go back over here into Pro Tools, and I will go ahead and look at my breath controller, which is CC2, and I will add a little data. Let's go ahead and make sure also that the sustained fast, even though we're not triggering it, if that sample does play, then we won't hear the tremolo because it's not part of the same cell. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Let's go back and play from here. So easy as that. And one other thing that I've noticed is that I want to set this at the first port, and then not all, but channel 1, so that when we have multiple instruments, select them all. Actually, you can see that once one's set, it actually continually puts it down the corresponding number. That's really nice. But that way you can actually use all 16 channels in the first port and just save a ton of channels. So that is a crash course, more or less, in the Epic Orchestra. It's not a bad thing to have. It's really nice that they kind of give you um, the samples for this. Of course, you know, they're hoping that you're going to get other instruments from them, but at the same time, if you are happy with this, then more power to you, and enjoy writing with what you got. So on that note, if you have any other questions, just let me know in the comments box, and I hope this helped out, and until next time.